no ear, no nose, no tongue, no body, no mind, no appearance, no sound, no smell, no taste, no touch, no dharmas, no I dhatu up to no mind dhatu, no dhatu of dharmas, no mind consciousness dhatu, no ignorance, no end of ignorance up to no old age and death, no end of old age and death, no suffering, no origin of suffering, no cessation of suffering, no path, no wisdom, no attainment, and no non-attainment. Therefore, Shariputra, since the Bodhisattvas have no attainment, they abide by means of Prajnaparamita. Since there is no obscuration of mind, there is no fear. Transcend falsity and attain complete nirvana. All the Buddhas of the 3 times, by means of Prajnaparamita, fully awaken to unsurpassable, true, complete enlightenment. Therefore, the great mantra of Prajnaparamita, the mantra of great insight, the unsurpassed mantra, the unequaled mantra, the mantra that calms all suffering should be known as truth since there is no deception. Prajnaparamita mantra is said in this way. Te ata om gate gate paragate parasangati bodhisoha. Thus Shariputra, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva, should train in the profound Prajnaparamita. Then the Blessed One arose from that samadhi and praised noble Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva, saying, Good, good, O son of noble family, thus it is, O son of noble family, thus it is. One should practice the profound Prajnaparamita just as you have taught, and all the Tathagatas will rejoice. When the Blessed One had said this, Venerable Shariputra and noble Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva, that whole assembly in the world with its gods, humans, asuras, and Gandharvas rejoiced and praised the words of the Blessed One. Chenrezig te ata om gate gate paragate parasangati bodhiso baba gonju sonji gai dembe doji je roba doji nebo doji shewa doji ragi baji metum beju donji je dingorye zo yere nunya ye jo je wada Medo nu beje nan de wada no ma jun ji mon zun zun yo ji ra ji re ya ne na de re yo. The fundamental ground is scented with incense and strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru, the 4 continents, the sun, and the moon. I imagine this as a Buddha land and offer it. May all sentient beings enjoy this pure realm. Holy Lamas high, wrap the sky of your Dharma bodies in massive clouds of knowledge and love, and let them pour upon the earth of your disciples as we are ready, a shower of rain, the teachings deep and wide. Yo To you, precious Guru, Idam Guru Ratna Mandala Kam Niratayami. Chodan Jaji Jodam La Janju Badu Dani Jazuji Nagi Chunye Jibezo Nam Jin Jola Benji Zanye Jubayo Chodan Jaji Jodam La Janju Badu Dani Jazuji Nagi Chunye Jibezo Nam Jin Jola Benji Zanye Jubayo Chodan Jaji Jodam La Janju Badu Dani Jazuji Nagi Chunye Jibezo Nam Jin Jola Benji Zanye Jubayo.
Tanga to la rich with the largest ocean, the tender Rabani, tender Rabatala, the Yutan and Hibalam, Hibachalam, Hibachalam, the Jibu Chungu larger in Badan, Ding larger, Jibu larger, was only Chungu larger in Ba, tell us how much on some of the Jibit. Tela Ludusa, somebody on the Jideshama doing Jibluchibata, Jideshama di Totemba, Nile, Jideshama di Totemba, Tela Jondu and Lende, Lende. Talende, Tela Niba Deli Taji Tawa, Jideva Balafun, Lende Samba, Shirat Samba, San Jodusha, such as Mudigdua. Tatamash Samba, the Lamu and Susite, Samba Nije, Tombadala Jeje. That Sushit Sambatala, Lelanju, and Lelanju to them, but late and Rebbe Tembas, Lelanju to them, but late and Rebbe Tembas, late and Rebbe Tembatella soon, Nabil and Jetan, Kabil and J, and Legend Jean Tembas, and that's what the Nabil and the Catulate Marbe. Yes.
So once again, we're looking at Lama Tsong-kha-pa's Great Treatise on the stage of the Path to Enlightenment. And if we begin by looking at the outline, we find that it starts with how to rely upon the teacher that is the root of the path. And then the next category of the stages of how students train their minds after having relied upon the teacher or the Lama. Under that category, we find two categories: an exhortation to take full advantage of a life of leisure and opportunity, and then how to take full advantage of a life of leisure and opportunity. The second category, the how to take full advantage of a life of leisure and opportunity, we find the actual way to take full advantage of a life of leisure and opportunity. And we begin there with three major categories: training the mind in the stage of the past shared in common with beings of small capacity, training the mind in the stage of the past shared in common with beings of medium capacity, and training the mind in the stage of the path for beings of great capacity. Under the major heading of training the mind in the stage of the past shared in common with beings of small capacity, we have three categories: the actual training of thought of a person of small capacity, the measure of the attitude of a person of small capacity, and then dispelling misconceptions related to the person of small capacity. The first category, the actual training of thought of a person of small capacity, we find two categories. First, developing the state of mind that strives diligently for the sake of future lives, and then second, relying on a means or a method for achieving happiness in one's next life. So under that category, relying on a means or a method for achieving happiness in one's next life, we find two major headings. First, refuge, and then the second heading of karma and its results. So now we're currently in the section on karma and its results. So if we look at the categories of karma and its results, we find that we begin with a major headings of three. First, how to reflect on karma and its results in general. Second, how to reflect on karma and its effects specifically or in particulars. And then the third category is how one abandons non-virtue and engages in virtue after having reflected on karma and its effects in general. So those are the three major headings. And then under the first category of how to reflect on karma and its effects in general, we find two major headings. First major heading, the principal teaching of the 10 paths of action. And then the second category, which is the determination of the effects of actions. So under the second category, the determination of the effects of actions, we find three major headings that we go through. First, black actions and their effects. Second, white actions and their effects. And third, a presentation of other classifications of karma. And we're currently now dealing with black actions and their effects.
나빌레는 뭐다 지양 기쳐봐. 언제다가 저부터 보수고 나는 다 나빌레는 뭐 말봐. 나빌레는 뭐들 다 디바 먹어 주도 말봐. 디바 먹어 주대. 디바 먹어 주대는 제 삼바 요타도 이제적인 돈 노도가 어디 다지나는 그런 마다 그런 파다 어떻게 동안도 속은 어디 시장도 집에 네 pomba들 하마도를 제상바주와 타도스 도알로데 대제그레 단데 데바 먹어 주대야 아니 수저바다블 제상바주와 타도스 전나진 참말래 어디 제제 돈세도와
Less so.
Yeah.
And when we look at the black actions and their effects, we'll find three categories: the actual paths of black actions, distinctions of weight, and an exposition of effects. So when we get to the first category, the actual paths of black actions, we find then the presentation of the 10 non-virtuous actions, and then we find we go through the various aspects that are necessary for a path completion effect related to these 10 non-virtuous actions. So we find that there have to be 4 aspects present. We have to first have basis, second attitude, third performance, and then fourth completion or culmination. And we relate these aspects to all of the other non-virtuous deeds, but we also relate these to ethical behaviors in general. So when we look at the restraints or the ethics of the fully ordained monk or nun, or the novice monk or nun, those also have to have those 4 aspects present also in order for there to be an infraction when we look at breaking any among those other types of ethical behaviors, or actually engaging in any of those other kinds of not ethical behaviors according to the vow system that you've taken. So we apply these same 4 to the other types of ethics and non-virtues when we look at infractions.
나게 나바지 어디 차네 어디 라니 쳔부지 또 이제나 자단 둔줄도와 자단 둔줄 타타들로 자단 둔줄 다 이제 나세너서 로타송 말바 당가서 이제 나세너서 로타송 제거도와 어디 뭐 이제나 자단 둔줄 타들래 나세지 제너서 어떤 말해도와 이 쪽으로 된거도.
Okay, so when we look at the way in which we categorize these various non-virtuous deeds, we find that there are 3 non-virtuous activities of the body, 4 non-virtuous activities of the speech, and 3 non-virtuous activities of the mind. So we're currently dealing with the section on the non-virtuous activities of the mind, which are covetousness, malice or harmful intent, and wrong view. So the covetousness begins on page 224 in the English, and it's at the bottom of page 170 in the Tibetan.
도주 송조송 도주 송고나네 도주들로데 데이터들 친 데이터마들로와 나게 녀바 담부송 나제도 너문도 니외장 너는 하마다 템바송소스 당아지 준 참아지도 나제지마 이제로와 준 참아지도 송보대 나지 인스겐지다 나지 마인스겐지게 네 카니노 스제르미치 다 제르버조데 준 참아지도 나지 송보 준 참아지도 송보대 나지 인스겐데 너바데 제자 인스 하마나지 인스 어디 송도 말베
네. 네.
나치 타돌 말려고로다. 나치 타돌 뭐도 예와. 뭐들 다 나치게 나치범 해서 봐도 말베. 타도도 뒤자이 뭐 뒤 가동하서 뭐 뒤도 말베. 이제 뒤자.
Nandasida.
이제 뒤자더로.
So when we go back to the non-virtuous activities of the speech of lying, divisive speech, offensive speech, and senseless speech, if we go to the last one where we left off, senseless speech or gossip, we find when we look at the categories of Jayan Sheba's text, we find that we have the three categories of the actual culmination of senseless speech, and then the divisions, and then the debates or debates. So when we look at the actual culmination of senseless speech, we find that it's having finished an utterance of senseless speech. When we look at the divisions, which is the second category according to Jayan Sheba, we find that there are these 7 divisions or the 7 bases of senseless speech. And then at the end, the debate we find where we find the 2 systems with regard to the 3 vocal faults. It says one asserts that they are senseless speech and one that they are not. I have stated that here in line with the former, meaning Lama Tsong-kha-pa follows that all of the other 3 non-virtues of the speech, gossip, I'm sorry, lying, divisive speech, and offensive speech would all categorically fall under the gossip category, whereas other systems say that that's not necessarily so. But Lama Tsong-kha-pa says that he asserts that he follows the view that it is gossip. So we're looking at that last thing right before the non-virtues of the mind. And that begins on 223 and ends on 224 where covetousness begins.
What Nag never tumbles on the Nachi is lava in the Roa. That Nag never tumbles Zuma, Zun in the Nachi Bajo.
Cha.
Zun Tama in the Nachi Bajo.
Cha.
Situ in the Nachi Bajo Roda. What is the Marbe? What the Cholo Zun in the Nachi Michos and the Zun de la Nag Zun Luz
Lessa.
And the G. You're the best and then go into Syria. Le marbe ngagi nyeba tambosu ngachi hi junla jun de ngagi nyeba tambosu mai ngagi nyeba mai de leji nyeba imbeji wo de zamar wo to nge gudo da
Ale kashe gangi sena de zun lu zun yure
leji zun de le le ngale ma
ale
ngagi nyeba sanang ngagi jun ngagi chama ngagi chiji zombote ngachi is
leso
what the imba that
leso
nyomo jegun jeba ni so de imba that nyomo jegun jeba nyomo jeng chi na ngachi chaos ndu chi joro what the that re do nyomo jegun jeba ni nyomo jeng chi na ngachi chaos nyomo jegun jeba ni ngagi nyeba tambo sonde nyomo jeng chi inza ana ngachi is
Nyomon chen itsik
chi na ngachi chaos nyomo jeng jeba ni what the jirbe
then the zu ne
junga jun chama an chizu nga sonde ngachi is yero
then the long kabane zu okay
nyomo jeng jeba jirbe jo de ju kemba re
leso okay. So here it says there are two systems with regard to the first three vocal faults. So the reason that we find these three, it says three vocal faults, is that we can say that the vocal fault of lying, the vocal fault of divisive speech, and the vocal fault of offensive speech is senseless speech. But we can't say that if it's lying, it's necessarily senseless speech, because we find that there's non-verbal lying. So when we look at lying, we look at the two categories of lying. We have verbal and speech lying, and then body lying, or lying by the body. These are two possibilities, speech and body. So we can't say that when one lies through one's body that it falls categorically under senseless speech. So this is the reason for the specification, three vocal faults here. And the reason that Lama Tsong-kha-pa is asserting that he follows with the point that it is senseless speech is because in the Abhidharma Kosha, we find Vasubandhu stating that if it is a word possessing afflictions, it's necessarily gossip. So if it's a words possessing afflictions, or possessive afflicted words, then it's necessarily gossip. So this is why Geshe Rinpoche follows the system of the Abhidharma, because those would be words that are afflicted. So do.
What the people do, that the Nasen Nursing Lutas on the Marbe, each on Nasen Nursing, Nasen down Nasen the Tapish Doja Conjings on Marbe, Doja J, Nursing Tashidan, Ijirota. Tan Doja Danshidan said what there, and Doja the Yidon Alatin and Doja Jimuris, Yidmo Alatin Shidan Jimuris, and what. Duba yoba mayina, docha yoba kalanjurus. And Madu yoba mayina, Shedan yoba kalanjurus. Umatsawashiro madba. Umatsawashiro kote. Duba to yoba mayina, docha yungumaris. Docha de Duba tuala tenen, docha jungure. Maduba tuala tenen, Shedan jungures. Ta Duba tuna, docha ji chabadan, Maduba tuna Shedan ji chaba ayusana, chaba yomaro. Duba Maduba Sanji get Tongre, Sanji le Duba Tongre, and Sanji je Duba Tongre, Maduba Tongres. Duba Maduba Tong, Duba Madu Jitru Bezer, Jitru Sanji Chemchano, Chagrava. That Docha Jevala, you Duba, you Yidon Tonga Latene, Docha Jagure, you Yidon Tonga Latene, Shedan Jagures. What the Gatul Docha Conjun do what the you don't want to do the Docha Jungre, you don't want to do Telatene Shedan Jungres Marbe.
Then the Jawa Ngasem Jawa Gare. Ngasem gi Jawa Gare.
Then Nase Docha in some other Docha. And Shedan de Shedan said Conjun Marbe. What the Maduba Tonga Shedan Jagurva. Duba Tonga then Docha Jagu, nothing.
Less so.
What the need lady Samarbe?
So here, when we look at the next categories, we find the three non-virtues of the mind. So covetousness, malice or harmful intent, and wrong view. So when we begin with covetousness, we find that this is usually a state which is enforced or perpetuated by attachment. Covetousness. So when we look at how one becomes attached, or the opposite of it, having aversion, we see that in the root wisdom text by Nagarjuna, it says that in dependence on those things that one finds attractive, there's attachment, and dependence upon those things that one finds unattractive, there is aversion. So we find that anger is what gives rise to this aversion, or this anger is this. Aversion is anger that is arisen from seeing something that one finds unattractive. But we can't say that if it is something that's attractive or unattractive, that it necessarily gives rise to aversion or attachment, because the Buddha is always cognizing things that are attractive, but doesn't have necessarily these attachments and so forth. So we can't say that these objects are necessarily those objects of necessarily objects of attachment. But we can say that for ordinary beings like ourselves, attachment rises up in dependence upon something we find attractive, and aversion or anger rises up in dependence upon something that we find unattractive. So this is how we look at these two different states of attraction versus aversion, and how covetousness is founded or grounded in attachment.
다 유의도 동화라 때네 안시 나센당도 도샤 제바 예소서 디녜부들에 안도샤 녜부 모두 보고 살는 거래. 뭐도 공기나 때나 나센당 도샤도 넣는 거죠 말이야. 안시당 그냥 시당게 네 이도 뭐라 때나 콘도 제바 예소서 디녜부들에 샴바도 해주고야.
So when we look at the opponents to these various negativities, when we look at the opponent to covetousness, we look for the opponent to attachment. And the opponent to, or the antidote for attachment is meditation upon impurity or the ugliness of things. So when we look at the opponent to that attachment that is attached to something that it finds attractive, we find that the meditation opponent is the meditating on the impurity or the ugliness of that thing that we're finding attractive. And then if we look at the opposite for aversion or hatred or anger, then meditation upon love serves as an opponent to that anger or hatred. So we look at all of these negativities have opponents as well as things that perpetuate them. So it's similar to the fact that hot can stop cold, cold can stop hot. Example?
But the matter of Shashu Machu, Tari, the Nomet, the Legit, me measure, Shashu me is by the
Eastern person. That's
Shashu Machu, Tari, the Nomet, the Legit, Tari, the Honey Chichil, Nova Cheders, Manova Nyandu de Mares, Tari, the Nomet, the Legit, me measure, Tata Koroda.
So be mine.
Mad Sabu is a good target. No, Sabu to Tomini there, and Manuba Nadu de two Medroda. What the being but example. Shashu Machu, Tari, the name of the legend, Shashu Medic Tari, Tari Melnago. Call Tashi, hot Tashi. Tari the Tari pension, but call Tashi harm true. And the hot touching.
Okay.
Hot touching no. Hot touching harm true, cold touching.
Less so.
Well, couldn't teach you no to Marvel.
And Garshini, the Sharshu. Sharshu made
example.
Ale, Sharshu made the Ale Chuchen. Ale, Sharshu made Chuchen. Okay, so the.
Yeah.
Then the Kanga Yanjit Lagan. Sharshu made Chuchen. The Laram.
Tari is na cold touch.
Less so.
The name legend matters. You think that may basis. May either call Tajitan name de two.
May fire.
By basis. What the none of that or the pudding, but
so in the Prominent, I want to just get this exact, but the meaning will follow through here. So in the Prominent Vartika Karika, we find three various signs of opponent. So the first one shows the sign of cancellation or something cancellation. So how it shows how hot cancels cold and cold cancels hot. So the subject, the person in an eastern direction who is touching something cold, so person who is in eastern direction who is touching something cold is relieved of their heat, is relieved of their heat at that moment. So they're touching something cold, the tactile sensation that was hot is no longer hot because it's canceled out by the cold that the person is touching. So here this is the sign of cancellation, or opponent, which is a cancellation. I want to really look all of this up, but this is an opponent that is a cancellation. Tambo, then Nipa?
Oh, that the bamboo should be the 다 수차스 주변 해지면은 그 샤루도 오바자로바 고르도 아우니 고르도 아우니 그냥 생이도 거죠. 아우 샤루를 내고 샤루게 아우를 내고 샤루 세미도 아우 세미도 샤루 세고 니미가 샤루가 아우 세고 그냥 생이도 거죠.
샤로
고르 코로
카타
kata. Kata water.
Kata.
Puja.
Then a kata dang owl.
Owl numed legend namaris. Shaju sharu chu. Owl the numed legend minute sharu in beige. Example takorot. And Shaju in the old churches and that Druta. Sinek dancing the cage door. Shimuraji do Mude.
Lesser.
Okuni Chibarata. Shaju Sinek Chukaza, Sinek Church, no limit minute, Sinek in base. Without the pre example.
So it cancels out. How did the Ale de kata yin u yomare.
Kata Auni Zingo, Kata Hauni, Kunin Zingoro, and Kunin Goro Ham to Au.
Okay. Okay. I guess it's an equal harm. So it's some sort of an equal harm. Rinpoche is giving the example of a crow and an owl that fight. When they fight with each other, they're giving each other equal punishment, equal harm. So that somehow there's this is going to go somewhere, but this is the second example, is that of equal harm. So the first is the cancellation, and the next is an equal harm. And then the example is of the crow and the owl who are fighting, equally harming one another.
Kansa dame to share in Bishkun Digro.
Kansa dame dopi share.
That don't need to be shared to send you.
Okay.
Me, you don't need to be shared to Dazi the Nomen Legend the Minute, don't need to be shared in patience. What done that? Me, you Maduba Gomba choose in the chat Nomen Legend Minute, Maduba Gomba in patience. What required Marbe? And Meiji Niji Champion, she don't know the legend minute, and Hiji invasion, Shamba invasion to go in, but doing that.
So here, it's the wisdom realizing the selflessness of person is an opponent to the grasping at true establishment, because it realizes the lack of true establishment. So that it harms the view that grasps at true establishment. So the wisdom realizing the selflessness of person, Rinpoche said the wisdom realizing emptiness, harms or is an opponent to the wrong idea that grasps at true establishment. So it is a harm. Harms that view. So this is how the example of this equal harming of the bird. This harms the wrong view.
What that but the garden Nasen de Shine Susan de Nasen down the Chatham do Sharudo Banari, but Gigi no do that.
Nasen dan Nusen.
Nasen down Muduba Gumbulo.
Okay.
The Chatham Mudulo Sharudo Banavares. Then Sharudo Casa, don't need to be shared down, then they need the Sharudo Banavares. Some of the Ramundavares, what the Bajati.
So here we find that the meditation upon ugliness, or it becomes then an opponent to attachment, that then becomes an opponent to covetousness. So it's similar to the harm that's taking place with the fighting, the harm that's taking place. And likewise, the wisdom realizing emptiness is an opponent to, or harms the grasping at true establishment.
타바 드린지로 타바 드린지 드마이메 셰소나 드린지로 내노도와 what doesn't have.
So when we recognize that the rope is not a snake, then this harms the idea that the rope is a snake.
What the Nijita Kande, the Chatamudu Bokum Neje, Shedanta Nija the Shamba, Neje, and then Sabata Tamunda.
So it's similar to that this meditation upon ugliness or impurity then becomes the opponent to the attachment, and likewise the love and compassion becomes the opponent to aversion or hatred. So this is how we see that these things negate or harm their opponents.
And of course, you don't want it, and you don't want euro, and then nothing go the Chujima be you don't want the you don't want Zelendeva. Shibuji, you don't want tone, Lulu Shed and Marbe. You don't want Zelendeva, you don't want, and one tiny you don't want tea, children, David, Sandra, which visit home. Then the Lulu Shirin, the Tondu, and then nothing to what they sent the Sudan of which. What the John de Shachi.
So that this covetousness arises out of this attachment, which is putting inappropriate qualities upon what one is attracted to. It's not to say there isn't something that is attractive. It's putting these qualities onto what one is finding attractive that are not are actually wrong, mistaken consciousness or wrong consciousness. So these qualities that one is putting onto this thing.
What another do Tari no Tari Tatalo, the Shaju Mechu, Sharu, the name and legit me measure. Then and the Shaju or the Shaju Mechu, Tari, the name and legit me measure. And damn to be sure that the name and legit what Tari Tadru.
So we find these subjects of the Eastern, the person in the Eastern direction. Who is has a touching a cold feeling is negating one's hot feeling, and so forth. In the Signs and Reasoning texts, and in the Pramanavartika Karika, Dharmakirti's commentary on the Compendium of Valid Cognition. So we find these topics that we're presenting here, presented in those places. So now we'll slowly go through the section on covetousness.
Joa Tatu Jiroa, Tatomon Nasen Jin de Jagodoa, Tomon Nasen Jene, Jen Nuet on Lonchus, Jen Gaza Jenda Nuet on Lonchus to Nasen Jeres. Nasen Chebola Tambo, Jen Nuet on Lonchus to so, Yidon, Duba Tongo Duba. Yidon, Duba Yuba Marina, de Chayoba Calanjus, Jen Nuet on Lonchus to Sukolo, Duba Tonga de Mena. And tell me the chat Chigmares. Duba Yuba Marina, the Shayoba Calanjus. Tombo, what the change in the Lonjo to change example, what the not you don't want to. And then you don't sell in the Bachuji, my jigger, you don't sell in the Bajigger, you don't want it happen. Lai Duzinamaji. What the Lai Duzinamada, Lai Uzinamaji tone, and then telling the chat there. Shugul Hunshi Rabanaji, sent the Gonba, so the Kennedy, not sent you to Shajumra.
So when we look at this topic of covetousness, we find that there will be these four categories: the basis, attitude, performance, and culmination. So there will be these four aspects here. And the first, we begin with basis. So the basis is of covetousness is the wealth or possessions of another person. So here, these are only if one desires them or wants them. So here, there is a qualification that one is wanting this. When we look at this covetousness, one is wanting or desiring these possessions or wealth. In order for this actual covetousness to take place, there has to be a desire for these possessions and so forth. And then,
yeah. Nothing is chosen as Jenji not on should tell me nothing to go Marwa. Tan du shit that Jenji not and Jenji no him to Shiba, Jenji, Ujil and Doshiba to Jinja. Jitala turn Doshiba, Jitala turn Doshiba was and Dushi, New Moon Sumbukanusa. Tan New Mutan de chat on. Condu dans Chedan son bouc en rond latin, un nasset chigres, marbe. Colon d'agre shawan de bao chien du nord dans l'enjeu de ce galo, un gal gogundu n'abe, d'agre shawan de ba. Colon de wateres, colon teje, ta joie, sans but de la toa cheba, sans but un chien qui nord dans l'enjeu de un sous-lion que toa cheba, bédun chez vote, joares. Joaje, what about Jujana?
And Jorwa, they don't agare.
Joa Tajen, dans l'enjeu de Susuluage, Lekajia Euro.
Leka.
Leka, Joas de Marbe. Jenju dans l'enjeu de Susul Gabache Gorota. To Susuluage,
Ra Leka.
Lekache.
Leka.
Joas de Marbe.
Ah, they. Okay. So here, the basis of covetousness are the wealth and possessions of another. Of the three aspects of the attitude, the perception is the perceiving the basis of what it, to be what it is. So here, the basis to be the wealth or possession of another, and the affliction is any among the three. Coveting because one is attached, coveting because one has hatred or aversion, or coveting out of delusion. And then here, the motivation is the desire to make the property, wealth or property your own. So here one is wanting to have these things. This is a desire or a want to have them. And then the performance is striving at the completed purpose. So actually engaging in the work to make the possessions of another become the property of your own. So I asked Rinpoche, that's what I just asked, what is this striving at that completed purpose? What does that mean? Rinpoche says engaging in the work to make that actually happen. And the culmination is thinking, may it become mine, about the wealth and the like.
That's so. Tala tene tatu tele anu kasugre sente jenji no don lonju lai no don lonju tabutel ba tin bana ba chigi sente jong na sente jong man do no la so ba dagr shawa chuji nya ba was sente ba tin kan ku man do to din do sha jong man do.
So here the basis of covetousness are the wealth and possessions of another, and then we have the three aspects of attitude, and then the performance is actually working at completing the purpose of wanting to make the property of someone else's one's own, and then the completion is thinking, may it become mine, about the wealth and the possessions of another. So once one thinks in this one thinks, may this thing which I want become mine, at that point the attachment has arisen and then covetousness is present.
ndo temba daga shao ngeba wo shi ndo temba je tene zubi tse ma zubi tse saji sung de do saji sung jang ji go de ta do de saji sung de ne ane tambu de wo de daga shao ta ji ba se do de ndo temba de ja daga shao ju ji nya ba wo sa wo de je ta tela nasen yonsu zubala chue nga chango yonsu zubi se nasen yonsu zuba jebala chi chue nga chango res nga ma chana nasen yonsu zugu mare nga chansu na nasen yonsu zugu res yonsu zubi se se do de jaji sajil jiag se do de chue nga chansu na nasen yonsu zuba jigre nga ma chana nasen yonsu zuba jig mares se deres
Nga, the giant Shiva Ewa Sum. Tambo Nipa.
Tambo de water, Janji water, or Tambo de Tatula soon les. Tatula, nothing tattoo de la son, do temba, Zubi se, Mazubi se son. Do temba dere, do temba de Nola Daga Shawa Chuji about water. Tattoo the red door, do temba. Do jin son the imbere. That Zubi said to what the man not re.
Okay.
Tell her nothing you Zubi say, Zubas de door. Yonsu Zubala, Chechukazi Sang, Shunga Sang, what the Yonsu Zubi said there is.
Then a Sumba?
Not Sansona, Chechu Zubare, not the Masona, Nasa Zuba Chilmares,
Nipa.
Zubi said what there is, the legitimate Zubi said Zumares.
Then a Sumba?
Somba yonsu ma wo le
Then
re
the
ale tambo tel nga de she ja go do tela na sen yonsu zuba la chunga chang go des nga de sho sana tambo rang long she la sabar chabi saint dan ba na sen jigen de le rang long she la de sha yo ba ju res rang long she la sabar chabi sentan temba tambuche rangi nadong longsho tuzule chaba yobaji guru tambuche ngaganane nyeba de longsho suba debi kanchaji sentan tembas ane longsho mamuswa sayagi deba yoken kanchaji sentan temba jimi doshan jimendoa kanchaji sentan temba nyeba je tane jenji nyela suba zambula suba yonsu 도진 르냐와 셰베 큐비 센터데바스 다 제주는 동롱셔도 그걸로 잠불라 소바 용수 도진스 이동와 셰네 안네 워티시다가 야부르냐바 추지 많이 비진다 보면도 르냐와 셰베 큐비 센터데바스 오페진 갈 고군도 선바지면도 큐비 센터데바 somebody shibare ta jenda ki khayi batte dag juji nyaba kui senda dembas ta jenda ki no don long shetu ngalo ne dag juji ba juji mala ta bon ramudwe juji nyaba kui senda dembas jeje 다 나센데 뭐차 매진 나센 제소나 ane ngosa yuku mare ane nyemi linga banjuwa meshebes nyemi linga banjuwa meshebe ane seji nebe sentante mo hotu nga teres nga tsansuna nasa zuba jigre nga damasona nasa zuba jigmares nasa zuba tses yangjibe tsedo hote jirmaji teres yeah.
So in covetousness, when we get to the fourth category of the completion or culmination, Jamyang Sheba says there are three specific sections here. First, the abbreviated culmination. Second, a full-fledged culmination. And then third, what makes not a full-fledged culmination, or what is not full-fledged. So the first category deals with the abbreviated culmination, and that's where it states Sangha's point that it describes this as the determination that it will become yours. So here, this is the abbreviated way to explain what culmination is, according to Jamyang Sheba. So here, Lama Tsong-kha-pa pulls from a Sangha's text and quotes a Sangha. So that's the abbreviation. The next is the full-fledged category. And then there are 5 points that are made. So Jamyang Sheba says, what makes a full-fledged covetousness? So we go from abbreviated to full-fledged explanation. Full-fledged requires these 5 qualities here. And then the last category is what is not full-fledged, which we'll get into after. But right now, what is full-fledged? Having a mind that is exceedingly attached to your own resources. So being attached to what you currently have and own, the things that you have, your house, your car, etc. So the basis begins with attachment to your own things. And then the second category is an attachment that wants to accumulate many resources, food and drinks, trying to accumulate these things. It's a desire to have many, many things. The third is having a mind of longing due to comprehending or experiencing the good things of others, their wealth, and so forth. So it's seeing what others have, finding their things to be attractive, and then wanting those things that they have. So this is the third category. The fourth category, having an envious mind, thinking that whatever is another's should be your own, is a mind that is almost making an aspiration or aspiring to have others' things. So it's the same word as a dedication or an aspirational prayer is used here, but it's an aspiration to have others' things. And then the fifth is having a mind that is overcome due to covetousness by shamelessness and obliviousness, the determination to be free from the faults of covetousness. So here, this is a lack of shame that one has about one's covetousness, where he or she doesn't think that being covetous is bad. There's anything wrong with it. So it's a shamelessness related to this obliviousness. So it's not having shame about what one is doing, here being covetous, because one is oblivious to the fact that one shouldn't be covetous. So here it's about the determination. So one is oblivious to wanting to be free from covetousness is a better way to put it. Not just oblivious to it, oblivious to the want or desire to be free from it. So that's the fifth category under what makes a full-fledged covetousness.
That's what. Tannasen jebala na susugi jala chaba yoba jugudowa. Susu jala chaba mena nasen chitu me. Da jomba tuzule susu jala chaba yomare me sonson nasen yomares.
Da jomba, okay.
An chabi senda dembas. Ta longshu suba debi kancha senda demba. Longshu momusaya ge kancha senda de wote le chan ramendwa. Da jomba zulte yomare. Ane Menro. Jenji Nella Zombo Jenji Nen no Longe do Zucalo Zombo Yonzu Tojin, Zombo Yonzu Tojin, Runyan AGB, Chubisenda Demas. Jenji Nen no Longe do Zombo Yonzu Tojin sont du Lai Nen no Longe Namji, Piji Tondo Mendoa. Jenji ne la suba zamba yonsu tojin runyan ashebes, runyan ashebe ko yidong wanseli deba tondo mendoa. Chubi senda dembas. Jenda ki kanyin bate, jenda ki nondong longshe kanyin bate, daga juji nyaba kuyi senda demba. Jenda ki nondong longshe yidong wate, pe ngalu yonshu manataba rabi insaribe. 다그 쥐지 녀봐 쿠이센터 나루 고군도 나루 고군도 어떤 살로 고도 만도 쿠이센터 덴바스 나센테 모사 매지 나센 제우송상 는 모사 용 말스
That's so.
녜미랭아 반종아 메시베 세진에 비센다 된바스 어떤가디 어떤가 창소나 등가 세 등가부 가로 마사나 안에 나세 용수 마둘라스 나 창소나 나세 조그레스 어디서
Da jumba the ngapu karong yin kanga pansun.
자중발로 소토슬 어떤가가 되 매지로다 그래서 나세요
나세.
되자 매지 어디 산탄 베지멘로서
So then when we look at these five qualities that are required, we can look at each of them one by one and then show the type of being that doesn't have that and then prove that they don't have covetousness. So first, having a mind that is exceedingly attached to your own resources. So first, in order for there to be this full-fledged covetousness, one has to be attached to his or her own things first. So resources and wealth. So when we look at a foe destroyer does not have attachment to his or her own resources, and therefore a foe destroyer does not have covetousness. So by not having one or all of these things, it's not a full-fledged covetousness, so it negates that. So the next is having a mind of attachment that wants to accumulate resources. So here, wanting to have many things. A foe destroyer doesn't have this desire or attachment to accumulate many things, therefore he or she doesn't have covetousness. The next, having a mind of longing due to comprehending or experiencing the good things of others, their wealth and so forth. So looking at the things that others have, wealth and their things, and finding them to be very attractive, and then becoming attached. A foe destroyer doesn't have this, therefore he or she doesn't have covetousness. The next category, having an envious mind that is thinking whatever is another should be your own. This is that aspiration, that prayer almost, the aspiration to want what others have. A foe destroyer doesn't have this aspiration to want what others have, therefore he or she doesn't have covetousness. And then the last category, having a mind that is overcome due to covetousness by shamelessness. So having a mind that is not has no shame and is oblivious about the need to be free from covetousness. A foe destroyer doesn't have that negative quality, therefore he or she does not have covetousness. So these are the five qualities that are required, and if any among these five are missing, then there is not a full-fledged covetousness. So we'll take a short break and we'll be right back.
Ngabo shesun des
Tome.
nela soba dagar juji nyabo ta do temba do dere.
So when we look at Jayan Sheba's outline, we find those three categories. First, the abbreviation of culmination, the full-fledged culmination, and then not full-fledged. So we begin with the abbreviated full culmination, and that's where it says, Asanga describes this as the determination that it will become yours. So this is that first category.
Ta zubi se se dere do tela na sen yonsu zubi se chunga chang gutes what the zubi se what the tengo aris.
So now the next is the full-fledged covetousness, and then there are five qualities that are required for this.
Tela na sen yonsu zubi zubala chunga chang gute tambo rangi yuji la labar chabi sen da demba tamji longshu suban debi kancha ji sen da demba ni ba je jenji nala suba zamba yonsu toji runya ba jebe chubi sen da demba somba je jenda ki kanye ba je no da longshu kanye ba de dag chuji jabe kui sen da demba jeba je ta ngaba na sen de ngocha meji nyemi le ngaba jwa meshebe sejunebe senda de batanga de zubi sed tanga chansona na sen zubare ngad masana nasen yu mazus jirme jo to song dos rubi che do deres ta mazubi che de ta mazubi che de la sa ji song de do mazubi che da yu do ju anne mazubi chen ji shi sa ji song jang ji bi sa ji song de do mazubi de la mazubi che je yu do ju je 마주비 chen jeshi 사지 송디네 안에 마주비 체도 왔더래 생아부 강로 마사나 나세지 체니 모주소스 왔더래 마주비 체도 네된고였으다 생아부 마사나 나세지 체니 모주소스 어떻게 마주비 체도 어디 템버스 마주비 체도 쇼스나 나부 강로 마사나 나세 용수 마주버스 체도 어디 템고스 다드네 니버드 유도주 아니 유도주 네 먹어 주들래 참말로 좋아 요요 말했어 제 삼바 좋아타도 말봐 제 삼바 좋아타도 네 먹어 주들래 제 삼바 좋아타도 참아 주갈 요요 말했어 티바이나 안데 주갈래 와도 좋아 요아레스 그 유도주랜도 유도주 먹어 주가 먹어 주갈라 nenju shubi sale joa sonsos 먹어 주갈라 joa 요아레 nenju shubi sai 거서 저번 봐봐 두면게 먹어 주발래 먹어 주갈라 joa 송 요아레스 먹어 주갈라 joa 요아레스 nenju shubi sai 거서 주갈라 joa 송 베제스 어떻게 유도주들 자지 보들 유도 joal 도바 주버레스다 다다는 마들에 송바들에 마주비 체지 제시 마주비 안에 나세 용수 마주비 체지 네 제바시바 너무 용거래서다 마주비 체지 마주비 용수 마주비 나세도 주주네스 왔던 마타 제시 되는 말에 마주바 제바시 말이다. 마주비 체지 제시 용수 마주비 생 용수 나세서 주주네사 용수 마주비 나세서 주주네스 용수 마주비 나세 주주 체지 가능가르스나 제마 친지 대변 제마 친지 대변 대다기 다기 tentu 주지 진도바 진도 주나 제마롱 냐바다사 어떤데 마주비 체지 어때 담부도 되는 상을 되는 고거에서 담아 제마선 양양 담아봐 제마 친지 되면 대 다기 tentu 주지 진도바 진도 주네 제마롱 냐바 어디 체지 담부도 어때서
Then Senshi, the Jayan Sheba, Ewa Sumba, Ewa Sumire. The Datayan.
Yeah.
The Jayan Sheba, Tambo Ewa Sum.
Mazubi Senshi Jeshis. Tambo Yondo Temba.
That's so.
Zubi se, Mazubi se Song.
Then Mazubi say Ewa Sum.
Mazubi se de la Ewa Song.
Okay.
Mazubi se, Yu Tuju. And then Mazubi Senshi Jeshi.
The Jue Duchu.
Yu Tuju.
Enjiking is Yabazu.
Yu Tuju se
Jua.
Nago Chukali Jua Yuri Maris.
Okay.
Lejile Nabasangaki Nabaje, Eji Nabasung Juro. Chukali Jua Yuta Mess, Tuba Yuma, Tuba.
Ale, the
Jeremy
nature.
Tuba Yuaris. Tuba Yuete, and Papa Tumek, and then you should be psycho. So, Mago Chukali Yuasung Beages. What it was you, but it's a tell Tuba Yujiro. Kashi Jua Mess again.
Questions of performance. And then Senshi, Sumba. Okay.
Ta Mazubi Senshi Jeba Sheba, Mazubi Senshi Jeba Sheba, Teredua, Mazubi Senshi Jeshi.
Okay.
Geshe se wadere dua Geshe se.
So when we look at then this next, so we look at the categories, we find the three categories. The first category of the abbreviated culmination, the second category of what makes full-fledged covetousness, and then a third category of what makes it not a full-fledged covetousness. Now, in that category, Jaimin Sheba says there are three categories. So the first category is the what the actual meaning of what it actually means if it's not full-fledged, or what it means to be not full-fledged. So here it's answered, if any of these five minds are not present, there is no actual covetousness. So the first category is what it actually means to not be full-fledged. And then the next category is a doubt that's related to the performance of other deeds, or doubts that may arise related to the performance of other deeds. So here it says the level of yogic deeds says to apply these five to all 10 non-virtues. So the question here is that when we look at these other 10 non-virtuous activities, do we apply these five to them as well? So this is the next section that's dealing with the doubts related to the performance of deeds. So that's the second category. So the first category under not full-fledged is what makes it not a full-fledged. What is an actual not full-fledged covetousness? And in this case, we're talking about covetousness. It says when the five minds aren't present. And then it says, now the next question is, do we apply these to the other 10? And the answer is yes, we apply these, and according to Sangha's levels of yogic deeds, we apply these same five to the other 10. And then the next is the expansion by example. So here there will be examples it says, as for the manner in which an action might constitute covetousness that is not full-fledged, it is such covetousness when you give rise to the following desires. So there'll be examples of not full-fledged covetousness, and so it's expanded examples. So examples. So these will be the categories that we go into. So the Chu Tambo Lapsoin, the Ewa Drew Chu Tambo Lapsoin, Lobsang. The Ewa Drew Yure, the Nye Tsampa Tambo Lapsoin.
Ewa.
Yeah, Ewa Drew.
Nasenji tatula ne tambo so marbe. Nasenji tatula do temba jubise majubise so ro.
Lasa.
Do temba de yin so so. No la so ba dag sha chuji ha ban do temba je.
Lasa.
Da jubise de yin ba ane jubi tala nasen yong so jubala chunga chang ko de sa. Jubise de ro. O de ba do jubise je.
Lesso.
Ta majubi chede sed ngabu karu masana
Lesso.
Ngabu karu masana sirwa sed ngabu karu masana nasen ji cheni noso maju so majubi chede guyos majubi chede guyos do ta de yu to juden gores mago jugale yuwa riskin keba ji dan ne yuwa men riskin ka ji yuin ji
Lesso.
an jermi ji go de mag chugale yuwa yus la res jusen karsna sebe phama phaba to me ne ju shu bi sai ko so mago chugale yuwa song be
Lesso.
o de yuwa to ba je res
Tene.
ta maju bi chen ji marba
De.
ta song ba de maju bi chen ji je she se 용수 마주비 천지 제바셰바 안에 단단들에 용수 마주비 나세스 주주네 용수 마주비 나세스 주주데 천지 쇼스나 제마치지 되면 제마치지 되면 되면데 다그텐도 주지 제뇌바진도 주나 제마론 하바스
The Drew.
대 용수 마주비 나세스 천지 드레스
Lesso.
천지 드레스
Lesso.
단데 말바다 보나 달로마가 잡은데 주에나 잡을 때는 나의 유부차네 내가 갈러나야 Latubaji Yunga Shus, Juji Yabe, Nasen Juhote, Yonsu Mazubi Nasen Reseta. Jema Chinji Debentas, Jema Chinji Deben Lubak Bambutan Marbe, Middletown Mayos and what the Mosayoro. Jema Chinji Debenta and Middletown Mayor Tabate and Daki tend to Juji, now you Joshus, tend to Juji, the Bajin to Juna, Jimarunyaba. Now you Chane, begin the Banayuna, Jimarunya,
Jobo.
What
may I
sound Kugro?
Nay, you
also Madubi, Nasechito, the rest.
the tumble. Okay, Sopodu. Sopodu. The Kanga, okay, so Rinpoche just quickly went through all of them again, so I'll do the same. So when we look at the categories Jamyang Sheba comes up with, we first find the abbreviated culmination, and that is the determination that it will become yours. So this is the abbreviated culmination. Then when we find a full-fledged culmination related to covetousness, we find that there are these 5 qualities that have to be present. When we look at what makes something not full-fledged, and here we're talking about covetousness, where we say that if any of those 5 things aren't present, here are 5 minds, then it is not a full-fledged covetousness. So under that category of not full-fledged covetousness, Jamyang Sheba says there are 3 categories. First, the actual full-fledged covetousness, which is when any of the minds are actual, not a full-fledged covetousness, is when there is not any among those 5 minds present, then it is an actual, not a full-fledged covetousness. And then the next category is the doubts related to other performances. So doubts related to other performances. Performance here, performing any among the 10 non-virtues. There are 2 lineages of instruction, or 2 systems of related to this. And Lamrim Tsong-kha-pa says one system states that we don't apply these 5 to the other 10 non-virtues, but the system according to Asanga in the text called the Level of Yogic Deeds states that we do apply these 5. So Lama Tsong-kha-pa states that we do apply these 5 to all of the 10 non-virtuous deeds. And then the last category is the examples, but by expansion by way of example, or expanded examples. Here it says, as for the manner in which an action might constitute covetousness that is not full-fledged, it is such covetousness when you give rise to the following desires. So the first example will be given now. So the thought, oh, how nice it would be if the master of the house were to become my servant, and the things could be however I would wish them. So here, this is the thought, for instance, if a king, the king of the land, you wish that the king could become your servant, and then you could take the place of the king. Or, for instance, the mayor of Middletown, Rinpoche said, if you then could make the mayor your servant and become the mayor. So it's this thought of wanting to put someone under you, to make them serve you, who is in a higher position. So Rinpoche gave the example of a king or a mayor. So this is that first one. When you here.
Yonsu mazubi nasen dambuji nasen senji dambuji nipa ti bodang choma lasu dang se lasu bi luji yuji lang tetar senpa dans ta tani chinji diben ane pembe tegi ane bodang jeme lasu ba longshe lasu ba sama ane ngayi longshe chana jima runya bi sanlu dewa de yonsu mazubi nasen senji nipa tere se ta ane chinji diben tegi bodang jeme dang yuji tu su kalo ngayi yuji chana jima runya bi nasen dewa de yonsu mazubi nasen re se.
So the next
choma su tang se la su bi lu ji yu ji lang de de sen ba nga ma jabu ben bu kurun san tang go re se ni ba ji no su ma zu bi na sen ni ba na sen se ni ba
de nga sen de yuna indicated
no su ma zu bi na sen no su zu bi na sen ni ja go do no su ma zu bi nasen su ju des what the
Yonsu Matsupi nasen?
Oh,
Garshine Matsupa.
nga ma chang be shi so
nga ma chang ale de sanlo kona de gender sanlo yomare de nga de nge chala shera gudu then de yomare de sanlo kona
jabu de nga yubu june na uchen de ba jin de na chi ma ro nya be wo de chi ju nga ma chang na sen res no su ma zu bi na sen chen je
okay
de bo da chongma da se la su ba de su nga lo ne ngai chala yo na ngai de long shu chuna chi ma ro nya be na sen de wo de chen ni ba isa mar ba
nga de chala dan pumo shera gudu
wo de ku ta mambu de cheme da bo da se da mambu yo ro
lesa
so nga lo ne ngai chala yin ba chala shu na sa be sang le isa mar ba sang da ba de sir
so the first one is so this is not a full-fledged covetousness. So I asked Rinpoche, why is this not full-fledged covetousness, these examples? And I said, is it only thinking what the thought is in this example? And he said, well, it's this example, and you'll see it's not possessing all of these 5 qualities in the example. So that's what we were dialoguing about, because I was just trying to figure out why wanting all of these things wouldn't be a full-fledged, but it's saying missing these, it doesn't have all of these 5 present. So the thought, how nice it would be if the master of the house were to become my servant and things could be however I wish them to be. So this reversal of the king becomes our servant, or the mayor. And then it says, and also with a thought with regard to his wife and children. So the king's wife and children, and then the possessions that he has and so forth, and his physical possessions such as food and so forth. So Rinpoche said a king would have so many different possessions, so many things. So wishing that these things, the wife, the children, the possessions, were one's own.
다 들으면 송바 체제 어때래도 안에 제마 단도 봐 총화다스 제마 단도 봐 총화다 라도 엠바다 전주 담바다 모두 되바다 동유가 수진라 소바 제지 세나 제마롱냐 봐 어디 용수 마주가 나선 지 어떤지스 말이야
The thought
나베 전주 가서 그래 난도 봐 총화 추시바 ane karsu kore wad chunru tangken che ane maadu tuba ane jimba tangken wad tende jimba de jengi shi na nyabe sanglu tu wade yonsu mazubi nasen tse chi tere se.
So here the next is the thought, oh, how nice it would be if others knew me to have good qualities such as being dispassionate, retiring, perseverance, learned, and generous. So wishing that one has, that others know that you possess these qualities that others have. So these are not qualities that you possess. This is saying how nice it would be if others knew of these that I had these qualities, and then there's a list of these qualities that one wishes that others knew one had.
Ya nasen seji lere doa dala jabutan tebentan dala jabutan tebentan kunaji kutte shebatan segusu tuna chemaron nyabe sanlu kugro wade yonsu mazubi nasen seji wotere sela.
The thought, how nice it would be if kings and ministers and the 4 types of followers of the Buddha were to respect me, and if I were to obtain such necessities as food and clothing.
Da jema da shema hajines odin ma yonsu mazubi nasen seji songdo jema da shema hajine di dunga la zwa dang zhabu dang changju gi jiden ne zhenchu wangji jiba de jiwa juji changdo deba jiba dang so de yongsu mazu na sen se ji yang kan sab mu de a jema da jewa shima le
jewa shima nga la yu ha supo kukshera
hal jene
lesa
na di dunga lai zo da che ro re ja zu ngalo zwa dang pele Abbot Chonju ki Jiden Nes, Abbot Jiden Chonju, Shinhama Bujota.
Glasso.
Jiden Chonju ne, Jenju Wanju Jibados,
Vishnu.
Jenju Wanju Dola de Jumarbe,
Glasso.
Joa Juji Nyato, Dobaje Hote, Yonsu Mazu, Nasan Senji de Jagota.
So the next is developing a desire, thinking. Then did Jipo Chomo dan Tumo Lanji Rimba the Chapagare.
Ta could tell the good Kazore. High Ludon Lonshet to go high Duzanamo. Tonga self, you don't want to see the way in Jere. The usual Matajan on a Chubichun Abdo. Go the Taba dredging Lundamiko to Tongolo Trudu.
So here, developing desire, thinking, oh, may I be reborn in the future as a deity and enjoy the deity's 5 sensory objects, and may I be born from the worlds of the fierce ones in Vishnu as a deity in the heaven of controlling others' emanations, the highest of the 6 divine regions of the desire realm. So I just asked Rinpoche, what's the difference between this and the mind of a person of small capacity who's desiring just these things? So Rinpoche said that any of the desire to be reborn in these places and so forth would be the small capacity, but it's being attached to here it says the 5 sensory objects of play. So the sights, the smells, the taste, the tactile sensations, and the sounds and so forth that the gods play with, being coveting those things, being attached to those things and wanting those things. So it's not the actual realm, it's the things of that existence, the 5 sensory objects, the worlds where they abide and so forth. And then it says as a deity in the heaven controlling others' emanations, so that when we look at the 6 realms of the desire realm, that's the highest realm. So the things, the place, the body, and so forth. So this attachment to those things is what number 5 is speaking of. Any other desire to be reborn in those realms would fall categorically under the training the mind, the stages of path shared in common with beings of small capacity, as a note, because the goal is the higher realm rebirth. So Rinpoche said that any other things. So there's this mistaken idea, just like one is mistaking a rope for a snake, this mistaken idea of that there's truly nectar that the gods possess, that one then becomes attached to. So there's a mistaken conception that's taking place in that particular case as well.
Da yonsu mazubi nasen tamado terendo pamatang potang chumatang trenla soba tang Tsamba shibi yuji lan deba jinayang nasen sosa yuji lan deba jinayang ta yuji tuzu kangalo hai duzi namaji tone sen timba nabaji wadini sanglo yuji ramatu chidang nga su wate deba jiba zangji ayi mere nga su wate pabunga narini nga su chun rudu le an chala tel senpa sudu kindachi chiga wate nasen res Tenajin Pamatan, but the Uji to Sula, Saint Subatabi, what did I say to Yosu Mazubi, Nasan Tamato,
so here, the last category, developing desire for the possessions of parents, children, servants, and the like, or the possessions of your fellow religious practitioners. So when we look at Pabunka Rinpoche's commentary on this section, we find that the mind of covetousness is a mind that thinks, if only I had that. So there's this idea, if only I had that, if I only had those possessions of parents, children, servants, and the like. So this is how Pabunka qualifies the covetousness by this, if only I had that. So we can see how that number 6 point relates to Pabunka's commentary on that.
So
there are 6 categories here related to the covetousness, non-full-fledged covetousness. But we'll go through them again slowly. So we need to go over these again and again, go around them again and again, and then look at Dalai Lama's commentaries, compare them, and listen, and then we'll know more. Listen and compare, and we'll know more. Decent.
Less so. Less so. So once again, looking at Jayan Sheba's outline, we look at the actual culmination or the actual completion when we're looking at covetousness. We find in the abbreviated form, the first category, we find that it is, as a Sangha states, the determination that it will become yours. So this is the abbreviated section of the actual culmination or completion. And the next category is how it is a full-fledged covetousness. And then we find the four categories that have to be present, the five categories rather that have to be present. And then the next category of Jayan Sheba's is what constitutes not full-fledged. And then in that section we find that there are three categories as well. So the first category we could call the measure of what is not full-fledged. So the measure is if any of these five are not present, there is no actual covetousness. So that's the measure of what is not full-fledged. The next is debate related to performance. And then we find that there are two systems of belief. One that states that we do not apply all of these five to all 10 non-virtues, and then one that states that we do. The one that states what we do is we find in the levels of yogic deeds by Master of Sangha. And Lama Tsong-kha-pa follows that particular tradition. And then the last category are the examples, expanded examples, and then we find that they'll be of what is not full-fledged, and then we'll find 6 categories that we go over in that section. Suda kendeke sheba jilitan nasen lo de marbe nasen ro de cha chon ro sona o de babun ka chon ro sona jala jil senba suda ba jung gre de nasen res soma naji yonsu zubi nasen inanda yonsu ma zubi nasen inanda yutele pasuda kendeke sanlo de nasen manwa
the yonsu mazubi the tamayan
yonsu mazubi nasen tar tusu
okay
True what the Yonsu what the Layatana Utile Sempa Sudik in the Mendra. Chunga Masan Yonsu Mazubari Matu could not say this. Yonsu Zubinase Maris. What to look at she Sabaji Machina, Yonsu Zubinase, the Yonsu Mazubinase, the Shiramutu Kalilu Namajagu.
So if we don't know what these words mean, then it won't mean anything to us. So we can have covetousness that isn't a full-fledged covetousness. So what's the difference? What differentiates between what is covetousness and what is full-fledged covetousness? So we have to be able to look at all of these points in order to know what the meaning of it is. So in order for it to be full-fledged covetousness, there have to be these 5 qualifications present. But there can be covetousness that isn't full-fledged covetousness, and that would be a covetousness that doesn't have all 5 of these present. So when we... Jason, I forgot.
용수 주비 나센도 용수 마주비 나센 가니도 용수 주비 나센들 중앙 상우노 중앙 상나 용수 주비 나센레스 중앙 마선 나센 걸로 용수 마주 나센레 들라 조자소
맞아요.
조자소 와도 걸로 다간데 유도던 통도 센트바 소드게나 샤다이 버다
오케이.
중앙
투체.
중앙 상나다 마선난다 와도 센 유도로 센 소드게나 Nothing.
So when we start to look at what, I remember now, I apologize everyone, when we start to look at this word covetousness and what this is, it's when we see something that we find attractive. So when we look at Pabunka Rinpoche's text, we see a piece of merchandise, or we see something that we find attractive, and then we think to ourselves, if only I had that. So this thought, if only I had that, takes place. But then from there, in order for it to be full-fledged covetousness, there have to be these 5 qualifications present. But from that thought, there can be covetousness without these 5 present, but it won't be a full-fledged covetousness. So if we see these words and don't know what full-fledged covetousness or this seeing an attractive object and developing desire, and we don't know what this whole process means, then we won't know what we're reading when we read more detailed information in a book. And that's why it's important to go through this in such detail, so that when we see these words describing something that's very in-depth, we'll know what the in-depth part is that it's describing. Then we can really analyze what is covetousness. If we can say that there are forms of it that aren't full-fledged, and what does that mean, and so forth. So we can look at it in a truly complete way.
유모이나 로시 차로고라 나세는 로시 차상 용수 주비 나세데 로시레 랑 조율을 주의 바래 용수 마주비 나세 조버대야 아네 로시 랑 조율을 주의 바 임베지 what 조율을 주지도 자마시나 루든 되자.
So then we look at it even more in depth. We look at full-fledged covetousness and covetousness. What are these? These are consciousness. And then when we look at the 7 types of consciousness, what category would these fall under? We would say they fall under the 7th consciousness, which is the wrong consciousness, because they are mistaken with regard to the object. So they're a mistaken wrong consciousness. So they would fall categorically under number 7, because they are afflicted view, an afflicted view, and therefore wrong consciousness.
And then your motor to go to Balushi. Nothing enough to Balushi. What the logos are marva.
So when we look at wrong consciousness, we can divide it into 2 categories. Conceptual wrong consciousness and non-conceptual. Medopa.
Dopa Lushi.
Dopa da Medopa. Dopa Lushe Tenzin.
Tenzin and your moina to Balushi chap. Tenzin to Balushi chalogua. That to me Lushi the tongue of the Megi Sheba to the other. Karumuna Megi Sheba and what the and Taba drinking Megi Sheba, what the Sukalo Lushi is Marva.
Tarpa Druzi Mi Sheba.
Taba drinking Megi Sheba.
Dome.
Tuba Lushi, Mishiro.
Then Midopa got it.
Tuba Taba drinking 이시바 타바 드링 이시바 두발로시 이제
Then Medobe Loshe Garian.
타바 가rum 호보나 미기시바 가rum 호보나 미기시바 가르드 카브로 소나마디
Oh, Blue Mo.
소나마디 카브로 소나마디 호보나이 미기시바 로로시로다
Then Medobe.
두발로시 두멜로시
Dome Loshe. Okay. All right, so when we look at the two categories of wrong consciousness, conceptual wrong consciousness, we would find any afflictions grasping at true establishment to be conceptual wrong consciousness that covetousness would fall under. Non-conceptual wrong consciousness would be, for instance, the apprehension of a white snow mountain as blue. This would be a non-conceptual wrong consciousness. So we're just looking at the different categories. And Rinpoche gave the exact definition of wrong consciousness, and I'll have to look that up in order to get the clear exact definition. So, within the continuum of mistaken consciousness, something to that effect. That which is in the continuum of mistaken consciousness. But we'll look it up. It's right in the Mind in Tibetan Buddhism, that exact definition. So if anyone wants to look up the non-conceptual wrong consciousness, conceptual wrong consciousness, and then the examples and so forth in a very clear fashion, you can find that in that text.
Lola yena kazu lori dunja wan ngon sung jeba jishi ju nala mane tsung loshe deja man wato ta nyomo to so sheba yindul dun ngon kare isna loshe.
So when we look at the 7 minds in the 7 different divisions of mind, so when we look at the definition of mind, we say that which is aware, that which is a knower. So that which knows or is a knower. When we look at the divisions, we find 7 divisions. We find direct perception, inferential valid cognition, correctly assuming consciousness, a consciousness to where the object was seen but not apprehended, doubting consciousness, wrong consciousness, I missed one. Direct perception, inferential valid cognition, correctly assuming consciousness, immediately preceding condition, immediately preceding consciousness. So it's a direct perception, inferential valid cognition, immediately preceding consciousness or condition, correctly assuming consciousness, consciousness to where the object was seen but not apprehended, doubt, and wrong consciousness. So when we look at afflictions, it would fall categorically under wrong consciousness. Kontriwa, you're right.
Okay, yeah.
Immediately preceding consciousness.
Conception of house.
Thank you for clearing up the misconception. In the past, I thought an action to be complete was thinking about it, doing it, and then rejoicing in it. Could you explain if or rejoicing fits into that somehow, if it's necessary?
The ngatsu the lay the Chenmo din chungo the ngama the tsanlo gu then joa gu then the Jesu yeron wa yuna then lay tsar then ngama ngat the chiran the trison then drawa gare then ngama the lay Chenmo gu na the som gu
Junga Jusung Sans. Joa, Moja Jusung, Sansona, and Deba in a Junga Jusung, Deba in a Deba Chibres. Ni Sanson and G. Chimadamasan, what the Lari Kaji.
Then Jesu Yeranwa, the tattoo, Dandrawa Yere. Then
Jesu Yeranwa, the Laya Junga Jusung Sama Yajirota. Joa Yabaje, Shanjuk Saint and Hijita and Rasanta, and Jesuiraje, Shukulum Juan Abajabaina, Jungan Jusum Soy Moijeruda, Jesuira, Goachi injury. The Davi injury.
Yeah, the kakare, the je dans des sum, the kakare.
Je kare.
The je dans joa dans.
Je samba joa.
Je samba joa.
The kakare.
The kakare. Yine the sum yuna, the je yin go.
Jungan jusu sai gwa yina, joa jusu sai diba yina, ane je samba joa tatu tsang agu. Taji do ta.
So Rinpoche is saying these are two separate topics. So the four aspects of basis, attitude, performance, and completion are as a separate topic than the topic of the motivation, the performance, and then the rejoicing. So when we previously talked about that, we do find, though, that way of breaking down karma in other Lamrim texts, where we find how these three are present, then this creates the greatest degree of result. If two are present, a medium degree, and then if one is present, a small degree of result. So I asked Rinpoche then, if we say these three are present, are the four present? Or if in order for any of these things to take place, if we look at comparing the two, so if we have only the motivation, then the motivation and the performance, for instance, then does that mean that all of the other four were already present? So Rinpoche said this is something that is a good point to bring up and that we should look at and check the signs about to see how these three relate to those four, and if all those four have to be present in order for one of those to produce a result, etc., etc. So Rinpoche said it's something that we should look at, and that we do find those divisions in other Lamrim texts where we see those three, and this is just a separate way of putting it that's not connected, but we should see how we can connect them. Special bulletin. Sumba dedagi jepu la sumle. Oh, I see.
What the Majilla Natu Jungan, Debachishun, the Natun, the Gute Gulus, Laima, Sanga Sumar, Sanga.
So Asanga stated these three levels, and Rinpoche is saying we're going to get to that. I'm going to find it right now. Here. The strength in terms of attitude, the Heap of the Jewels Sutra mentions, with regard to wrongdoing, afflicted attitudes that are strong and long-lasting have greater strength, and among these, hatred is very powerful. So in this section here, we find these points that are going to be made that you're making. So we'll find that in terms of strength, we'll get into in this section. Just trying to find.
What the cat to the ancient Rotagondo, what the Debachini Chonso, what the song was.
Oh, 1 second. I'm sorry. Hold on. Sumba Jepa Jepo Sun Namengi Jepo. So at page 236, I apologize. In the English is where we find the section Rinpoche said to start on, the fruitional, the Namengi Jepo.
What the Nami Cho, the Nami Jepo Marva?
Nang Jepo, Lelam.
I didn't know if it was imbued in the lack of shame or obliviousness.
The Ngutsa Mepa, Jesu Yerenwa Jawa Yure. Ngutsa Mepa, Jesu Yerenwa.
Ngutsa Mepa Leatana. Ngutsa Mepa, Jesu Yerenwa Jirota. Jesu Yerenwa Nemeko, Diba Jirota.
Jawa Yure?
Ngutsa Mepa, the Abushita is not taking Yorota. Most of the Abu Mari is not taking Yorota.
When we say shamelessness is that when you don't have shame, you're thinking that what you're doing is good. So you could say there's an element of rejoicing within the lack of shame. So we can look at this this text and look at the points later.
Yeah.
So that's the section. I apologize, I gave you the wrong page before, but it's page 236 where the fruitional effects begin. Natsu karma sum je. And we have a couple of minutes. Does anybody have a question? Shishina kalikasu. That's trouble, dude. You know, Yanjer, then. Yeah. Rinpoche said today was a little difficult, but if you listen to difficult, then it's good. Listen to things that are difficult, it's good. And thank you for everyone's patience. A lot of this is new material for me also, so I just don't have necessarily always a frame of reference. But as we do it over and over again, that's the good part, that we know that it'll become clear, certainly. It should. So we'll do the concluding mandala offering and dedication prayer. Thank you, everyone, for coming. The fundamental ground is scented with incense and strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru, the 4 continents, the sun and the moon. I imagine this as a Buddha land and offer it. May all sentient beings enjoy this pure realm. I dedicate whatever virtues I have collected for the benefit of the teachings and of all sentient beings, and in particular for the essential teachings of Venerable Losang Drakpa to shine forever. I send forth this jeweled mandala to you, precious Guru. I dedicate all this virtue to emulate the knowledge of the hero Manjushri and likewise Samantabhadra as well. With whatever dedication is praised as supreme by all the conquerors who traverse the 3 times, I also dedicate all my roots of virtue for the sake of auspicious deeds. In that pure land surrounded by snowy mountains, you are the source of all benefit and happiness. All-powerful Avalokiteshvara Tenzin Gyatso, may you stay until samsara's end. I pray for the long life of the precious Khensur Wandak, upholder of scriptural and realizational doctrines, the spiritual friend who trained extensively in the 5 great philosophical texts, exceptional wisdom and perseverance. Suji Rinpoche Gutsi